Alexander Grothendieck was a German-born French mathematician who became the leading figure in the creation of modern algebraic geometry. His research extended the scope of the field and added elements of commutative algebra, homological algebra, sheaf theory and category theory to its foundations. While his so-called a relative perspective led to revolutionary advances in many areas of pure mathematics. Born in Germany, Grothendieck was raised and lived primarily in France. For much of his working life, however, he was, in effect, stateless, as he consistently spelled his first name Alexander rather than Alexandra, and his surname, taken from his mother, was the Dutch-like Low German, Grothendieck. He was sometimes mistakenly believed to be of Dutch origin. Grothendieck began his very productive and public career as a mathematician in 1949. In 1958, he was appointed a research professor at the Institut des Hautes Études Scientifiques and remained there until 1970, when, driven by personal and political convictions, he left following a dispute over military funding. Although he later became a professor at the University of Montpellier and produced some private mathematical work, he otherwise withdrew from the mathematical community and devoted himself to political causes. Soon after his formal retirement in 1988, he moved to the Pyrenees, where he lived in isolation until his death in 2014. Life, family and childhood. Grothendieck was born in Berlin to anarchist parents. His father, Alexander Sasha Shapiro, had Hasidic roots and had been imprisoned in Russia before moving to Germany in 1922, while his mother, Johanna Hanke Grothendieck, came from a Protestant family in Hamburg and worked as a journalist. Both had broken away from their early backgrounds in their teens. At the time of his birth, Grothendieck's mother was married to the journalist Johannes Radatz and his birth name was initially recorded as Alexander Radatz. The marriage was dissolved in 1929 and Shapiro Tanneroff acknowledged his paternity, but never married Hanke. Grothendieck lived with his parents in Berlin until the end of 1933, when his father moved to Paris to evade Nazism, followed soon thereafter by his mother. They left Grothendieck in the care of Wilhelm Heydorn, a Lutheran pastor and teacher in Hamburg. During this time, his parents took part in the Spanish Civil War as non-combatants. World War II. In 1939, Grothendieck went to France and lived with his mother in various camps for displaced persons. The first was the Camp de Rieucros. Later, for the remainder of World War II, they lived in the village of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, sheltered and hidden in local boarding houses or pensions. His father was arrested and sent via Drancy to the Auschwitz concentration camp, where he died in 1942. In Chambon, Grothendieck attended the Collège Savinal, a unique secondary school founded in 1938 by local Protestant pacifists and anti-war activists. Many of the refugee children hidden in Chambon attended Savinal, and it was at this school that Grothendieck apparently first became fascinated with mathematics, studies and contact with research mathematics. After the war, the young Grothendieck studied mathematics in France, initially at the University of Montpellier, where he did not initially perform well, failing such classes as astronomy. Working on his own, he rediscovered the Lebesgue measure. After 3 years of increasingly independent studies there, he went to continue his studies in Paris in 1948. Initially, Grothendieck attended Henri Cartan's seminar at École Normale Supérieure, but he lacked the necessary background to follow the high-powered seminar. On the advice of Cartan and André Weil, he moved to the University of Nancy, where he wrote his dissertation under Laurent Schwartz and Jean Dieudonné on functional analysis, from 1950 to 1953. At this time he was a leading expert in the theory of topological vector spaces. By 1957, he set this subject aside in order to work in algebraic geometry and homological algebra, comparing Grothendieck during his Nancy years to the École Normale Supérieure trained students at that time: Pierre Samuel, Roger Godement, René Thom, Jacques Dixmier, Jean Cerf, Yvonne Bruhat, Jean-Pierre Serre, Bernard Malgrange. Leila Schneps says, "He was so completely unknown to this group and to their professors, came from such a deprived and chaotic background, and was, compared to them, so ignorant at the start of his research career, that his fulgurating ascent to sudden stardom is all the more incredible, quite unique in the history of mathematics." IHES years. In 1958, Grothendieck was installed at the Institut des Hautes Études Scientifiques, a new privately funded research institute that, in effect, had been created for Jean Dieudonné and Grothendieck. Grothendieck attracted attention by an intense and highly productive activity of seminars there. Grothendieck himself practically ceased publication of papers through the conventional, learned journal route. He was, however, able to play a dominant role in mathematics for around a decade, gathering a strong school. During this time, he had officially as students Michel Desmaistre, Luc Alluja, Michel Reynaud, Jean-Louis Verdier and Pierre Delaine. Collaborators on the SGA projects also included Michael Artin and Nick Hatz. Jean Giraud worked out torsor theory extensions of non-abelian cohomology. Many others were involved. Golden Age. Alexander Grothendieck's work during the Golden Age period at the IHES established several unifying themes in algebraic geometry: number theory, topology, category theory and complex analysis. His first discovery in algebraic geometry was the Grothendieck-Hirzebruch-Riemann-Roch theorem. A generalization of the Hirzebruch-Riemann-Roch theorem proved algebraically. In this context he also introduced K-theory. Then, following the program he outlined in his talk at the 1958 International Congress of Mathematicians, he introduced the theory of schemes, developing it in detail in his Elements de géométrie algébrique and providing the new, more flexible and general foundations for algebraic geometry that has been adopted in the field since that time. He went on to introduce the étale cohomology theory of schemes, providing the key tools for proving the Weil conjectures, as well as crystalline cohomology and algebraic de Rham cohomology to complement it. Closely linked to these cohomology theories, he originated Topos theory as a generalization of topology. He also provided an algebraic definition of fundamental groups of schemes and more generally the main structures of a categorical Galois theory. As a framework for his coherent duality theory, he also introduced derived categories, which were further developed by Verdier. The results of work on these and other topics were published in the EGA and in less polished form in the notes of the same année de géométrie algébrique that he directed at the IHES. Political activism. Grothendieck's political views were radical and pacifist, and he strongly opposed both United States intervention in Vietnam and Soviet military expansionism. He gave lectures on category theory in the forests surrounding Hanoi while the city was being bombed, to protest against the Vietnam War. He retired from scientific life around 1970, after having discovered that the IHES was partly funded by the military. He returned to academia a few years later as a professor at the University of Montpellier. While the issue of military funding was perhaps the most obvious explanation for Grothendieck's departure from the IHES, those who knew him say that the causes of the rupture ran deeper. Pierre Cartier, a visitor de longue durée at the IHES, wrote a piece about Grothendieck for a special volume published on the occasion of the IHES's 40th anniversary. The Grothendieck Festschrift, published in 1990, was a 3-volume collection of research papers to mark his 60th birthday in 1988. In it, Cartier notes that as the son of an anti-military anarchist and one who grew up among the disenfranchised, Grothendieck always had a deep compassion for the poor and the downtrodden. As Cartier puts it, Grothendieck came to find Buers sur avec une cage d'oreille. While Grothendieck was at the IHES, opposition to the Vietnam War was heating up, and Cartier suggests that this also reinforced Grothendieck's distaste at having become a mandarin of the scientific world. In addition, after several years at the IHES, Grothendieck seemed to cast about for new intellectual interests. By the late 1960s, he had started to become interested in scientific areas outside mathematics. David Ruelle, a physicist who joined the IHES faculty in 1964, said that Grothendieck came to talk to him a few times about physics. Biology interested Grothendieck much more than physics, and he organized some seminars on biological topics. In 1970, Grothendieck, with two other mathematicians, Claude Chevalier and Pierre Samuel, created a political group called Survivor. The name later changed to Survivor et Vivre. The group published a bulletin and was dedicated to anti-military and ecological issues, and also developed strong criticism of the indiscriminate use of science and technology. Grothendieck devoted the next 3 years to this group and served as the main editor of its bulletin. After leaving the IHES, Grothendieck became a temporary professor at Collège de France for 2 years. He then became a professor at the University of Montpellier, where he became increasingly estranged from the mathematical community. His mathematical career, for the most part, ended when he left the IHES. He formally retired in 1988, a few years after having accepted a research position at the CNRS. Manuscripts written in the 1980s while not publishing mathematical research in conventional ways during the 1980s. He produced several influential manuscripts with limited distribution, with both mathematical and biographical content. Produced during 1980 and 1981, La Longue Marche à travers la théorie de Galois sous AC, 1600-page handwritten manuscript containing many of the ideas that led to the ɡʁɔtɛndik program. It also includes a study of Teichmuller theory. In 1983, stimulated by correspondence with Ronald Brown and Tim Porter at the Bangor University, Grothendieck wrote a c. 600-page manuscript titled Pursuing Stacks, starting with a letter addressed to Daniel Quillen. This letter and successive parts were distributed from Bangor. Within these, in an informal, diary-like manner, Grothendieck explained and developed his ideas on the relationship between algebraic homotopy theory and algebraic geometry and prospects for a non-commutative theory of stacks. The manuscript, which is being edited for publication by G. Maltz and Otis, later led to another of his monumental works, Les Dérivateurs, written in 1991. This latter opus of about 2,000 pages further developed the homotopical ideas begun in Pursuing Stacks. Much of this work anticipated the subsequent development of the motivic homotopy theory of Fabien Morel and V. Voevodsky in the mid-1990s. In 1984, Grothendieck wrote the proposal ɡʁɔtɛndik program for a position at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique. It describes new ideas for studying the moduli space of complex curves. Although Grothendieck himself never published his work in this area, the proposal inspired other mathematicians' work by becoming the source of descendant-font theory and abelian geometry. It was later published in the 2-volume geometric Galois actions. During this period, Grothendieck also gave his consent to publishing some of his drafts for EGA on Bettini-type theorems. In the 1,000-page autobiographical manuscript Récoltes et Semis, Grothendieck describes his approach to mathematics and his experiences in the mathematical community, a community that initially accepted him in an open and welcoming manner but which he progressively perceived to be governed by competition and status. He complains about what he saw as the burial of his work and betrayal by his former students and colleagues after he had left the community. Récoltes a semi-work is now available on the Internet in the French original, and an English translation is underway. Parts of Récoltes a semi have been translated into Spanish and into Russian and published in Moscow. In 1988, Grothendieck declined the Crafoord Prize with an open letter to the media. He wrote that established mathematicians like himself had no need for additional financial support and criticized what he saw as the declining ethics of the scientific community, characterized by outright scientific theft that, according to him, had become commonplace and tolerated. The letter also expressed his belief that totally unforeseen events before the end of the century would lead to an unprecedented collapse of civilization. Grothendieck added, however, that his views are in no way meant as a criticism of the Royal Academy's aims in the administration of its funds, and added, "I regret the inconvenience that my refusal to accept the Crafoord Prize may have caused you and the Royal Academy," and that he apologized for the inconvenience. La Clef des Songes, a 315-page manuscript written in 1987, is Grothendieck's account of how his consideration of the source of dreams led him to conclude that God exists. As a part of the notes to this manuscript, Grothendieck described the life and word of 18 mutants, people whom he admired as visionaries far ahead of their time and heralding a new age. The only mathematician on his list was Bernhard Riemann. Influenced by the Catholic mystic martyr Robin, who was claimed to survive on the Holy Eucharist alone, Grothendieck almost starved himself to death in 1988. His growing preoccupation with spiritual matters was also evident in a letter entitled Lettre de la Bonne Nouvelle sent to 250 friends in January 1990. In it, he described his encounters with the deity and announced that a new age would commence on the 14th of October 1996. Over 20,000 pages of Grothendieck's mathematical and other writings, held at the University of Montpellier, remain unpublished. They are now being digitized for preservation and will probably be made available to the mathematical community. Retirement into Reclusion and Death in 1991. Grothendieck moved to a new address which he did not provide to his previous contacts in the mathematical community. Very few people visited him afterward. After his death, it was revealed that he lived alone in a house in La Serre, Ariga, a small village at the foot of the Pyrenees. In January 2010, Grothendieck wrote the letter, Déclaration d'intention de non-publication, to Luc Alouja, claiming that all materials published in his absence have been published without his permission. He asks that none of his work be reproduced in whole or in part and that copies of this work be removed from libraries. A website devoted to his work was called An Abomination. This order may have been reversed later in 2010. On the 13th of November 2014, aged 86, Grothendieck died in the hospital of St. Gyrons, Ariga. Citizenship. Grothendieck was born in Weimar, Germany. In 1938, aged 10, he moved to France as a refugee. Records of his nationality were destroyed in the fall of Germany in 1945 and he did not apply for French citizenship after the war. He thus became a stateless person for at least the majority of his working life, traveling on a Nansen passport. Part of this reluctance to hold French nationality is attributed to not wishing to serve in the French military, particularly due to the Algerian War. He eventually applied for French citizenship in the early 1980s, well past the age that exempted him from military service. Family. Grothendieck was very close to his mother, to whom he dedicated his dissertation. She died in 1957 from the tuberculosis that she contracted in camps for displaced persons. He had 5 children, a son with his landlady during his time in Nancy, 3 children with his wife Mireille Dufour, and 1 child with Justine Scalber, with whom he lived in a commune in the early 1970s.